Bolstering the interior of their offensive line, the Seahawks selected UConn standout Christian Haynes with the 81st pick in the third round. What is the two-time All-American going to bring to Seattle's offensive line? We're going to chat with Huskies offensive coordinator and offensive line coach Gordon Sammis to break down his game on our latest bonus edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. A special thanks to all the 12s tuning in, whether you're listening in the San Juan Islands or across the country in Hartford, Connecticut. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. Continuing our NFL Draft Coaches Series, we're happy to be joined by UConn offensive coordinator and offensive line coach Gordon Sammis. He's going to be breaking down third-round pick Christian Haynes' game and maybe learn a little bit more about what Christian brings to the table off the field as he begins his NFL career in Seattle. This bonus episode is brought your way by FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Do you think Cale Makar has a hat trick coming in game 2 for the Avalanche against the Stars? Are you feeling optimistic about a bounce back game for Donovan Mitchell with the Cavaliers against the Celtics and scoring 20 or more points? You can bet on it all on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Joining us here on the show, a bonus episode of Locked On Seahawks. We're fired up to have Gordon Sammis, the offensive line offensive coordinator coach for the UConn Huskies. Had a chance to coach Christian Haynes the last 2 seasons. Thank you so much for joining the show, Coach. We greatly appreciate it. Obviously, this will be your 3rd year at UConn, but the opportunity to be able to coach a player like Christian Haynes, how are you seeing that impact the ability to recruit, especially now that he has been picked by the Seattle Seahawks in the 3rd round?
Well, I'll say this. In terms of recruiting, it's been great because I literally was able to text every one of my top recruits and say, hey, make sure you watch the draft tonight because our guy's probably going to go. So there's nothing better than that. You know, all my recruiting presentations, he's on there. All the film, he's on there making great plays anyway. So it's obviously it's been very beneficial to us. The only thing I could wish for, but I know he's in a good spot with a place that loves him, is more regional, just because we don't really recruit on the West Coast very often. But again, we'll take what we can get. So it's great.
Well, with Coach Moore's past ties to the Pacific Northwest, and now with him being in Seattle, maybe that changes a little bit. Maybe you start making this a little more national, like the basketball team has done over the years.
Having recruited in the Ivy League in the past, I know there's some great football out in Washington. So,
there absolutely is. I know we had a kid at Mount Si that played at Dartmouth for a couple of years. So there's definitely some players there that have looked at playing on the East Coast, but you entered a unique situation with Christian because obviously coming with Jim Mora as part of the new staff a few years ago, Christian had been a multi-year starter. He had the 2020 season that was lost in the middle of that, but he had started 2 seasons. What were your initial thoughts on him when you first joined the coaching staff and you had your first chance to see some film on him leading up to the start of your time at UConn? And were you already thinking this kid could have an NFL future in front of him?
Yeah. So, pretty much, I would say UConn's probably, I think it's been my 6th or 7th job now. And each one has been with a brand new staff. So, you always kind of try to get a feel for the players when you get in. And I think they had lost something like 13 guys into the portal in the previous 2 years. So we were going to have to do a major overhaul just in terms of numbers. So I'd heard a lot about Christian. I'd heard a lot about how good he was, but, I always take it with a grain of salt because I want to see him myself. So I ended up, when I got hired, I watched every play of Christian and every other guy who had played at any snap just to kind of see where we were at. And it was funny. It was a great thing. And it was also a concerning thing, I guess you could say, because as I watched all these kids in the portal, I just kept saying, well, this kid ain't better than what we have, meaning Christian, right? So I knew Christian was a pretty good player. And, after meeting him and seeing what kind of guy he was, what kind of a leader he was, there's no one I've had that's better as a player or as a person. So we were very fortunate to get him, and his loyalty to UConn. He kind of set the tone and gave us a model of what a UConn football player should be. So we were very blessed to have him, and the fact that he wanted to stay as well, because he didn't know us from anybody. And he really had 2 opportunities to leave if he really wanted in this day and age of college football, and he stayed both times without even a question being asked. So he's a pretty impressive guy, very loyal. We owe a lot to him for staying as well.
That is a perfect segue into my next question here, because this is such a unique situation for all of college sports with NIL, the transfer portal, and just seeing it feels like some of these players, they're changing teams as much as they change clothes. I mean, it's a different era in college sports, but Christian, you said, had those opportunities to potentially leave. And this was a theme for the Seahawks draft class. They've got a number of guys they picked who had opportunities to go elsewhere. They had a Division II offensive lineman they picked in the 6th round. And he could have left Finley, but he chose to stay. What does that say about the character of Christian Haynes, that not only did he stay for the first year with you guys, but when there was probably opportunities from being an All-American, hey, come to this Power 5 school, we're in a conference, we can get you a first-round selection. What does it say about him that he stuck through the process with you guys and remained loyal with the program?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it just says, like when we first got here, I guess it speaks to the relationships he had, and also the mental toughness he has in terms of, I want to make this thing work, and I want to be around when this thing does turn around. So I think it speaks a lot to that. And I think it speaks to the mindset of O-linemen in general. Those guys don't necessarily want all the flash. They're more about the steak than the sizzle. I would say all the time, we want steak guys, not sizzle. And I think that speaks a lot to the O-line, because it's, I'll be honest with you too, it's hard. It can be really hard to judge, to grade, to evaluate offensive linemen. And so if you're not quite sure, and if you don't know what you're looking for, there could be a lot of guys that pass, whereas, wow, this guy had 60 catches. We got to go get him. There's not those stats for the O-line like there is for skill positions. So I think it just, the position itself kind of lends for guys to stay and want to stick it out, because it's just in the nature of the O-line.
Yeah, it is a lot trickier from a recruiting standpoint, even if it's transfer portal or if it's high school kids, to look at stats. I mean, you can look at Pro Football Focus stats, but we all know that those are not perfect or foolproof at all. So those are some of the data that you have to work with, but there isn't the concrete catches, receiving yards, passing touchdowns, tackles, things like that you can look at. But once you had a chance to get on the field, as you explained, you had the opportunity to look at all of UConn's offensive linemen, the ones that had left, the ones that were coming back. Once you got on the field, what really stood out to you about the way that Christian handled himself in practice, and what stood out off the field or in the locker room as far as character is concerned?
I think the thing that stuck out to me most with those guys when I first got hired was, there's not many players that are in the office or in the building more than coaches, right? And him and a couple of the other leadership guys we had on the O-line, they were literally in here every day. I'd come in on a Saturday and they'd be all sitting in the main team room watching film. It got to the point where I was having to work more to put together more cut-ups for them because they were watching so much. They were in here working their technique, their craft, everything all the time. I mean, there were days where I had to tell them, hey, I don't want anybody in here. We need a rest day. And I think they understood the challenge of, and this is really, I guess, life in general. Like, if you want something, you have to be able to outwork the guy in front of you. It's not going to guarantee success, but if you're like, for us right now, if you're a 3-9 team, if you do everything the same, you're probably going to be a 3-9 team again. So what are you willing to do? It takes what it takes to go be that 6-6, that 8-5, whatever that may be. And I think, they really bought into that message, and they, I can't speak to any other team in the country to say, well, we outworked everyone. I don't know, because I didn't see what everyone else was doing, but they were in here every day working all the time. So I can guarantee you this, there's no one that outworked him and our O-line because of him, because he has that type of personality and demanded that they be in there. And not to make this too long-winded, but I think on the field, what made him special was his intensity, his attention to detail. And there were plenty of times in our 2 years together where he could have sat a day out. Because he's the best guy we have. He could have sat out. We would have been fine. He was still going to play. And whether it was like a sprained ankle or something with his wrist or like something small, but really he could have used it. He would not come out. He wanted his reps. He wanted to be out there because he felt it was important that he showed everybody the right way to do things.
Over the 2 years that you had a chance to coach Christian, obviously he was a fairly polished starter once you came. He had already been playing for quite some time, had a lot of snaps under his belt. But where did you see him blossom the most over the last 2 years in the field that really took his game to the next level, being able to be an All-American selection? And I think it speaks volumes to his talent level. Yeah. You said last year was a tough year for the team in the win-loss column, but for him to still be an All-American, where did you see him blossom in his game that took him to that next level?
Yeah, I think where he improved most is, I think first and foremost, we ran a system that really fit him and what he did. So he could really blossom in that way where everything we tried to do, he was like a fish to water with it. He was really good, the outside zone, the angles. I think he really improved as a player in terms of knowledge because he watched a ton of football. I think he really improved with his hands and his anchor, which helped him a lot in the pass game. And that made a lot of, obviously, the NFL is more of a passing league than college football. So I think it really made him appeal to a lot of people to show that he could play with anchor. He could handle speed rushers. He could handle games and different movement like it was nothing. And I think what helped him really improve as well was our last 2 years, we played 8 Power 5 teams. I mean, I guess you call them Power 4 now. But I just think that he was going against the best all the time, unlike a lot of different, group of 5 schools. Like at our level, we were unique in the sense that, we played 4 of those teams every year. So he got to go against Michigan. He got to go against Tennessee. So the Senior Bowl was not as much of a leap for him as maybe other guys.
That's a perfect way to go into the competition aspect, because I think that was maybe the biggest question mark with Christian that a lot of people had going into this process, this pre-draft process. Even though he had played over 3,000 snaps at UConn, he's an independent school, a lot of schools on the schedule that maybe aren't necessarily in those Power 5, or as you said now, Power 4 schools. But what did you see from him, the way that he handled going up against teams? I know that you guys played schools like NC State the last couple of years that had some NFL caliber talent on their defensive line. How did you see him handle those situations? And was that really where the light bulb came on, where you thought, not only is this guy an NFL player, but I could see him being an early round selection, and that gives a boost to your program as well? Yeah.
Well, I think there's a lot of, just a lot of his traits, the way he moved, bent, all that kind of stuff, his power. Like I felt like he would be some form of an NFL player, wherever that was in the draft. But the thing with him is because of his recruitment, just because of his nature, he plays with a chip on his shoulder, and he's always had a chip on his shoulder because he felt that he was disrespected in the recruiting process by a lot of schools. So any chance he got to play one of those big dogs, like you mentioned, NC State, Duke, Syracuse, BC, Tennessee, you name them, he really wanted to show them something because he felt like I don't want to call it revenge, but he just felt like he needed to prove to them that they made a mistake. And so he was always even more so hyped and ready to go for those games. Not that he ever had a letdown really for other teams, but you knew those ones were important to him just because of what he wanted to prove. And I told this story to somebody else, but it's pretty, so you get a snapshot of who he is. We played Tennessee. He rolled his ankle pretty bad against BC. He would not come out in the BC game, and he played fine. Tennessee was going to be really tough because they were darn good up front. And really for him, certain people might have just said, I can't go. And even the trainers could have told him he can't go. So he didn't look bad in front of those teams. It may hurt his draft, stock. But he would not come out. He wanted to go because in his mind, like he needed to show them. And that's just kind of the guy he is. He could have easily, and we would have never thought any less of him because it was a pretty serious injury. But he was not having it. He wanted to be out there. He wanted to go against those guys because he needed to prove to them that he could beat them.
Leading up to this interview, I was looking at it, and I see that you are going to be the play caller this year for UConn. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that's an exciting development for you. But looking towards Christian Haynes' future with the Seahawks, Ryan Grubb is now making that leap. Obviously had a ton of success at Washington as an offensive coordinator, but now he is going to be a first-time NFL offensive coordinator. in Seattle. How do you think that Ryan Grubb gets the most out of Christian Haynes from a scheme standpoint? You mentioned the outside zone and the angles and the athleticism that Christian brings to the table, but how do you maximize his strengths, at least early on, to give him the best chance for immediate success in the NFL?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Coach Grubb does a great job. I've watched him a bunch. I think he'll put, it's not just necessarily Christian. He's got to put the whole offense in the best position to be successful. I think the great thing about Christian is, with his explosiveness, his quickness, he's really good on some of those perimeter type plays where he can pull. He's a great jump setter, which I think will help him in that league to get on people fast. And I do think he runs the outside zone play really well, but he's one of those unique guys. I mean, like personally, he'll be fine in anything we do. His skill set fits that stuff the most, but he can run inside zone. He can run counter. I mean, he's one of the best counter blockers I've ever seen in terms of getting people dug out when he pulls. We just didn't do it a ton, but when we did have it in, it was amazing, what he could do. So I think one of the nice things for Coach Grubb and just for the Seahawks in general is Christian can be successful in whatever you guys want to do. But obviously his skill set's going to be really, really good in some of those fast-moving plays because it's how athletic he is. But that translates into a lot of football, being violent, being quick, playing with great eyes. I mean, that's any scheme. He can be great in that.
I'm really curious to see what's going to happen with the scheme for Seattle because Grubb was mostly a zone-oriented coach for most of his play calling time. And then last year, Washington flipped everything upside down and they were a heavy gap scheme team last year. So that's one of the big unknowns here with what Ryan Grubb's going to do in Seattle, especially going to the NFL. But I've greatly appreciated the opportunity to chat with you, Coach Samus. One last question that I've got here, because we were looking for stories and obviously you shared that great one about playing in the Tennessee game, but looking at Christian's future in Seattle, the immediate future, most notably, you've talked so much about the strengths that he brings to the game, but for him to really hit the ground running and be able to be a plug and play guy for the Seahawks, I think he's got a very good chance to do that at right guard. But where do you think he is going to have to make the quickest adjustment or the quickest improvements to be able to achieve that goal in Seattle and set himself up to potentially be a long-term starter for the Seahawks?
Yeah, I think for Christian, it's going to be refining everything he does, especially in the pass game. I think he definitely needs to improve his hands. And those guys are such technicians with their hands at the highest level that they will expose you real quick because sacks equals money, right? On the D line, you get a lot of sacks, you compress the pocket, you're going to get paid a lot of money. And conversely, with him and any O lineman, you got to be able to stop those guys because that's how you're going to make your money. So I think for him, it's going to be refining his hands, becoming a better puncher, less of a grabber. And he and I have discussed that already, and he knows what he has to do. But I think that's going to be the most important part to him, being, like you said, a plug-and-play guy, because I think he takes great angles. He's got great anchor. He's smart. He'll learn. What he doesn't know, he'll really study. So I think that's going to give him a major advantage. But, you can't let guys get your hands. You can't get guys take advantage of you in the pass game because when it's 3rd and 10, you got to be able to handle it when everyone knows what's coming. So I think that's where he's going to be working, and that's what he's got to do best to be able to be really successful at the highest level.
Having been at rookie minicamp last week, that is already an emphasis for new line coach Scott Huff, and you can see the Christian's already taken to it, and he is excited for the opportunity to work on his game and hopefully play early for the Seahawks. Coach Samus, greatly appreciated, and best of luck on the recruiting trail. I know that you're trying to get potentially the next Christian Haynes out there. And
trying our best. It's going to be hard to replace him, but I guess like Moneyball, we'll try to replace him in the aggregate, and find a way to do that. So yeah,
be Billy Bean of UConn. And you guys got a chance to get that next guy. So I appreciate it, man. Take care.
Thank you very much. Good luck this year.
Yeah, thank you. You can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up later, we will have our full Thursday show, as we do each and every year, going to be ranking Seattle's opposing quarterbacks on their 2024 schedule. Make sure that you're listening in. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday. Go Hawks.